Alrighty, we're holding on the bottom of page, Pei Vav Amud Aleph 86a. And so we're holding the last few lines. It says Itmar. Okay, we're learning the halachas like this. So we're talking about, in here we're learning the laws of kidnapping, and one of the conditions, so to say, for the violation of kidnapping to be able to be sentenced to death for kidnapping, obviously with all the warnings and all, is if you kidnap and sell. So one of the things is we need to have witnesses that are testifying that you've kidnapped so and so and sold them. So the question's like this. Itmar we learned it's like this. Eide Geneva, if you have witnesses that you stole, that someone kidnapped X, Y, and Z kidnapped so and so, and we have witnesses. Hey, Aaron, and we have witnesses. We have witnesses. That's a separate set of witnesses that you sold that person. So we have two sets of witnesses to complete a full crime of kidnapping that's punishable by death according to Torah. A person has to kidnap and sell. But it's different two sets of witnesses. One witness has said that so and so kidnapped, and the other set of witnesses said so and so sold. So this person. Benefesh shehuzmu, and so ve'ed mechira benefesh. It's talking about a person who they didn't just steal and sold, but they stole and sold a person, a nefesh, not an article. So it's not regular robbery; it's kidnapping. And then huzmu, they were found to be lying. So they were found to be witnesses that were not telling the truth. And again, what does it mean that they're lying? That we find the condition for is, hey Howard, the condition for Eidizamim is that they weren't there. It means they claim that on so and so day in such and such place something like this happened, and another set of witnesses come and says you weren't even there. You were somewhere else. You were no close to this area at the time that you claim to have been to have witnessed someone do this crime. You weren't in another place. Hey Bruce. Okay, so we're starting again towards the
Rabbi,
end.
what page are we on?
We're on page 86a at the bottom. So it'd be the last page of 86a. And the Gemara says Itmar. Okay. So Itmar, again, we learned that if there's two sets of witnesses, Eidi Geneva and Eidi Mechira, one set of witnesses that say that so-and-so kidnapped someone, and another set of witnesses said that so-and-so sold benefesh, such a person, meaning it's not talking about someone who stole and sold something, an item, but stole and sold a person, which is kidnapping. Then we learned last week that in order to be considered responsible to have done the violation of kidnapping that would give you the death penalty, you have to kidnap and sell the person. So you kidnap the person and sell them as a slave or what have you. So shehuzmu, and we found out that these witnesses are lying again. That they weren't there. They said they're in Seattle and such date and such time. So and so kidnapped so and so and sold them to someone else. And another set of witnesses come and say it's not possible. You weren't even in town. You were in Israel at that time. So now the question is: so the halacha is in general. The halacha of Eid Zayman, again, this is not the place for Eid Zayman, for the laws of witnesses that are lying. That we learn mainly in the tractate of Makos. We learn a lot about that. There's the reason why I'm bringing this up is because there's a complicated discussion which is not really discussed here. We're assumed that we know this information about the verses to teach us how do we punish these false witnesses. Traditionally, the punishment is that whatever they were trying to accomplish in their testimony, they have to do. So let's say they say testimony, a set of witnesses come and say that so-and-so owes $100 to someone else. And we find out that and based on their testimony, the person would have to pay because the Torah believes two witnesses. But another set of witnesses come and say that you said that you were a witness to a loan and you weren't in town. So it's not even possible for you to have been witness to a loan. You're lying. So what's the punishment? How do we punish these witnesses? So the punishment to the witnesses, they have to pay the $100. That's the rule of Torah. It extends to almost everything. If they try to kill someone with their testimony, so-and-so violated X, Y, and Z law, killed someone, whatever it is, then they get the same punishment. So we start to find where things change a little bit if they get old, we learned already in Sanhedrin before, if let's say they say testimony about a daughter of a Kohen, a Kohenes, who if she has relations outside of her engagement, she gets burning. We learned Eilan Nisrafim, right? One of the people get burnt. Punishment of burnt is a Bas Kohen who has relations outside of her engagement. So the question is, if they get burnt, or if they get the chenek choking, or they get beheading, whatever the law is, the punishment for the man. So we already see they don't get the testimony that they would say to her, because that's only unique to Bas Kohen, but they get what they would have caused the person who had relations with her. Okay. But what happens if they say other things that are not, you can't make those things happen? For instance, let's say they say testimony that a woman is disqualified, or a man is disqualified to be a Kohen. What are you going to do? The witnesses are not Kohanim. You can't disqualify them from being a Kohen as a punishment. They were never a Kohen. So you're not taking anything from them. So then we have a special limud in Makkos. We learn that you get malchus, that they get lashes. I mean, there's certain times when we can't punish them with what they were trying to accomplish. So then when they get malchus, now the foundation of why they would get lashes is not simple. There's arguments in the Mishnah and Gemara and to understand it. There's different verses. There's the verse of Leisan, there's the verse in the Ten Commandments. Leisan b're'echa et shakar. Don't say false testimony. And that some people want to learn that is the foundation, the warning for the malchus, for the lashing. Then we have another verse that says v'tztiku es tzaddik v'shiu es rasha, that they said false testimony. But there's a foundation in these important verses I'm saying, because later Rashi brings them down in our sugi right over here. So over here, what are they saying testimony? They're saying testimony. Let's say one set of witnesses would come in. One set of witnesses come in and say that so-and-so kidnapped so-and-so and sold him. So then there wouldn't be a question. Why? Because they were trying to punish this person with the death penalty, which is choking. That's the sugya we're learning now. That's the punishment for kidnapping. They've said false testimony. It wasn't true. So what would be their punishment? They would get choking. They would get the death penalty of choking. Here, the complication of this sugya, of this question comes in when neither of them say a full testimony. Means if the first set of witnesses come and say so-and-so kidnapped someone, they have no comment at all about what he did with the kidnapping. It could be the person remained in their home. If that was the whole story and they just remained as the witnesses, they wouldn't have caused the death penalty for the person who kidnapped. You only get the death penalty if you kidnap and sell. And then a second set of witnesses on top of them come and say that so-and-so sold someone. Now, just selling someone not related to kidnapping is not either violation. Why? Because a person in those days had slaves. Let's say a person has a slave. And you sold your slave. Right? That's what people did. They sold their slave all the time. They traded slavery. It's a slave trade, right? So you may not agree with it, but it's not punishable by death. So the two sets of witnesses, neither of them are saying a complete story of that is a violation of the laws of kidnapping. Each one is a part. You put them together, that the witnesses said kidnapped. The second set of witnesses said that he sold. You put them together. If you group them together, then you have a testimony of kidnapping and selling, which would have caused the death penalty. If he listens to both, it means the question is now, let's say we have the one set of witnesses say that Reuven kidnapped Shimon, the son, age, social security number, so-and-so. And then a second set of witnesses come and say, yeah, and then he sold him to someone else, right? So what would technically be the law if these were true witnesses? Then Reuven, the kidnapper, would be put to death because there's two sets of witnesses to complete a full crime. But the problem is now that we find that these witnesses are lying. And the question is, they could argue and say, we never looked to put this person to death because we only gave a half a testimony. Our testimony, we were just saying that he kidnapped him. We didn't say that he sold him. Why would you put us to death? So this is where it becomes a complicated sugya. So he said, the Gemara says Itmar again. So one set of witnesses said they kidnapped. The second set of witnesses said that they sold the person. And then they found out to be lying, shahuzmu. So what's the law? What do we do with these witnesses? Chizkiah says, Ein hergin, you can't kill them. We'll see why. Rabbi Yochanan, who argues on Chizkiah, says, Nehergin, they do get killed. Why? So the Gemara continues. Chizkiah says, Damak Rabbi Kiva. He also according to Rabbi Kiva, which Rabbi Kiva says in general about the laws of witnesses. In Cheskes Abatim, in Baba Basra, the Omer, Dover v'lei chatzi dover. A testimony is only a complete testimony. For instance, where does it come into question? The question is, if you have three sets of witnesses to say someone lived and worked the land, like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. In theory, if you work a land, if you live in a house, if you do what you have to, if you show ownership of a property for 3 years and you claim it's yours, you have to have a claim. You can't just say, I was here for 3 years. That's not enough. But if you say, this is my property, whether you say, I bought it from you, whatever, and you say that I have witnesses to show that I lived here as a person, I showed ownership. If it's a house, there's different laws. There's different laws how you show ownership. It depends what we're talking about. If it's a field, how often should the field be used? If it's a house, how often you have to live there, right? If someone comes to the house for 3 years straight, from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the afternoon when everyone's away at work, and he has witnesses or she has witnesses to show that they lived in the house for that period of time, that's not a sign of chazakah because no one knew that you were there. So the witnesses said that you were there, but you didn't live as a sign of ownership. But if you showed ownership for 3 years, the problem is what happens if you don't have one set of witnesses? You have 3 sets of witnesses that 2020, 21, 22, you lived in this house. Each set of witnesses only gives testimony for 1 year. So Rabbi Kiva says no witness is saying a full story. And there's a deeper problem because each witness could say that my testimony didn't mean anything. Because in order for a person to show ownership, they need 3 years. I never testified that the person lived there for 3 years. So there's no downside to my testimony. That's the biggest. We have another rule. The problem with with testimony is that we learned this before many times, that a testimony that you can't have hazama, you can't if the witnesses are saying something that if they found out to be lying, they wouldn't get punished because there's a loophole to their testimony. For instance, if you only said a half a story, right? So they say, you can't punish me. I never said the full story. I only said half a story. So then the question is, what happens if does the person get punished on that testimony, even if they weren't lying? It means let's say in our case, the question comes in our case. According to Chizkiah says that there's 2 sets of witnesses. One says you stole and one says you kidnapped. And he says, well, that Rabbi Kiva holds you need davar lechatzi davar. You need a full testimony, and there's only half a testimony here. We'll understand a little better in a second. The question is, even if let's say they're not lying, do we kill the person who kidnapped when he's being accused and being taken to court by witnesses that they themselves are lacking consequences if they're found out to be lying, because they could say, well, we only said a half a testimony. So Rashi will address that question. But let's see in a second. So Chizkiah says, like Rabbi Kiva, that the testimony, it needs to be a full testimony. They didn't say a full testimony, therefore they don't get punished as false witnesses, as a team of 4 witnesses, 2 sets of witnesses, and they don't get put to death. The Gemara doesn't discuss what happens to the person. We're only discussing what happens to the witnesses. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees, and he holds like the rabbis. What's the rabbi's opinion? No such thing. That if you could group together sets of witnesses to tell us in a complete story, so then that's considered a testimony. Therefore, that's a testimony. Therefore, that's also, if they as a group are lying, they get punished. Now, this is the point. Chizkiah agrees. What's the laws of Ben Sarimar? Ben Sarimar, we learned, is the rebellious child. The rebellious child has a process. The process is that first he behaves. It's a he, and only a certain age. We learned all the conditions of a rebellious child, that if the parents continue to see a pattern of his rebellion that proves to us that he's eventually going to be a person that cannot be part of society, right? So then in an extreme case like that, he gets put to death again. That never happened in history. But these are the laws. Fine. So the question is, but it's a process. What is the process? First, the parents come to the Beis Din and say, our son is behaving in a very outrageous way. He's stealing, he's buying food, he's eating uncooked meat, all the things that would create the scenario of a rebellious child. So what happens? The Beis Din doesn't put him to death right away. Like in any case, the Beis Din says, well, could we have witnesses that say that this is why you're behaving? And we know that to be true because we have witnesses. And we're giving you a warning. So first you get lashes for doing this, and you're on warning. If you do it a second time, then they get put to death. Okay. Now, what happens if you have 2 sets of witnesses? You have one set of witnesses that say The first set of witnesses have nothing to do with the second set of witnesses. First set of witnesses say that the initial step, that he was taken to court, and they warned him, and he got lashes. And the second one is that he would get put to death. The second set of witnesses. So what happens when we find out that the two sets of witnesses are lying? In this case of the Ben Sorah Mara. So there Chizkiah says no. In that case, that the first set of witnesses would get the lashes, and the second set of witnesses would get the death penalty because they were trying to cause the death penalty to this child. So in this case, Moed Chizkiah, Be'edim Achronim Sheben Sorah Mara Shehuzmu Shnei Hargim. Why? Lahalkois Banu Bahani Achrini Kula Davra Ka'avid. We turn the page to 86.2. So why? Because the first set of witnesses are going to say, I have nothing to do with the second set of witnesses. We're not a team. I only said the first part of the story. And the first part of the story, where he would get lashes for behaving this way. So now it's a totally disconnect from the second set of witnesses. The second set of witnesses are trying to take this child and bring him up to a new stage. We don't need 4 witnesses or 2 sets of witnesses to create a situation. There's 2 stages in the rebellious son. So the first stage was created by the first set of witnesses, and now built on that, the second witnesses are coming to build on to the next stage, because the first stage has already been set. It means the child's already been warned. He got lashes. And now the next time, if he continues on this path, he gets put to death. So it's not a combined effort that we need all 4 sets of we do need all 4 sets of witnesses, but there's a divide because there's 2 scenarios. Hold on, Eric. There's 2 scenarios. So therefore, in that case, Chizkiah would say that the second set of witnesses, if they're lying, they get put to death because they had their own full case. Where in our case, the case of kidnapping, there's no kidnapping that gets the death penalty. There's no punishment. It's not a complete story unless they, this is the initial thinking of the Gemara, unless they sell. Yes, Aaron, you're trying to ask something?
Yeah, why? Okay. First of all, what parent would bring their kid? That's probably why it never happened before. And number 2 is that why would the punishment be the same if false witness on a kid and an adult? Because false witness on a kid is worse.
You're asking an emotional question about the law. The law is that we're not going. This is not the subject of the law. The law we learned already a few months ago. The law is that a person who is a Ben Sorah Mara, a person who is a rebellious son, is if the kid continues to act a certain way, the Torah says such a son is taken out and put to death.
Correct. We've done that.
Yes, and that case, the parents are it's dependent on the parents to bring the child to court. I'm not going to go into what parents would do that.
I just brought that up real quickly.
Okay,
my question is why is the witnesses treated different, are the same for an adult case and when the false witness on a child?
It's not about a child or an adult. It has to do with what you're trying to do. If a witness says false testimony, and based on that testimony, they were trying with their false testimony to kill someone. I mean, they're trying to kill someone. It doesn't make them say they're trying to kill an adult or a child. They're trying to kill someone. They're not saying the truth. The child never did what they said. They weren't there. They've been proved to be lying. So what the question is, what kind of punishment do we give them? The Torah says that kasher zamim lasad achiv, like you try to do to this person, it happens to you. You try to put this child to death, you get put to death. So it's a punishment.
So it doesn't matter who you're putting to death.
No. It's a focus is on the witnesses. What were you trying to do? Same thing would apply if you try to make someone pay $100. You said false testimony that would cost someone to pay $100. Now you have to pay the $100. That's the punishment. Okay.
I got you.
I wanted to now just learn the Rashi, the last Rashi on the page of 86.1. It's an important, the last 2 Rashis. The problem is like this. The Rashi doesn't really get into, we're going to go a little bit slower in the Sugya, although we're trying to do faster the Gemara now, because it's not an easy piece of Gemara. The Gemara says like this, Eidi Gneva ve'Eidi Mechira. What is the case here? We have 2 sets of witnesses, 1 set of witnesses. This is the second to last Rashi on the page of 86.1. So there you have Eidim Gneva and Eidim Mechira. We have 2 sets of witnesses, 1 set kidnapping, 1 set selling. Again, in order to be put to death, you have to have a complete kidnapping and selling. Shnei Kiti Eidim, there's 2 sets of witnesses. Achas Eida 1, I'm reading the Rashi. 1 says testimony. Sheganav nefesh, that someone kidnapped someone. V'achas Eida, and the second set of witnesses testify. Shemacher, that he sold this person. So what would be the case? Eine Hargin, they don't get killed. This is according to Chizkiah. Can the Mefarish time of Azal, as the Gemara is going to explain. Now here's where Rashi says something that the Gemara does not discuss. We've learned many times that a testimony that cannot be the witnesses cannot be considered as false witnesses, that they get what's called Eidei Hazama, they get the punishment. Means you could prove them to be false, but there's no consequences to their lying. But let's say we don't know that they're lying, or let's say they're not lying. But a witness that says testimony that cannot have consequences, their testimony doesn't have value. So even though we have all the reason to believe what they're saying is true, because no one ever said that they're not true, but because in the event someone were to show up now, later, and prove that they were lying, there would be no consequences for them. If that's the case, then their testimony is holding less weight, and therefore the punishment that would happen doesn't happen. And let's say in our case, if two sets of witnesses come and they're not proven to be lying, they say the truth. One says you kidnapped, the other one says you sold. What do we do to the person that kidnapped, the kidnapper? If these witnesses are going to be lying according to Chizkiah, they're not going to be put to death. So therefore, it's what's called a testimony that EF Shalazimo, you can't turn them into Eidei Zomim. So therefore, their testimony has no weight or not enough weight, and therefore the kidnapper doesn't get put to death in such a testimony. Even if we never prove that they're lying, or even if we never have reason to believe that they're lying. But because in theory, their testimony doesn't have consequences, therefore it doesn't have the weight to pull the law. This is an amazing idea the Torah says. It means that when the Torah when the Torah looks at a situation, we're not building a case of it's not just looking at the crime. We don't just look at the crime. We look at the crime from a bird's eye view, and we have to take into account all the pieces that create the crime. And the crime, it means in theory, when you have a kidnapping and a selling, right? What's the story here? In theory, the story is that someone kidnapped so-and-so and sold them. That's the whole story. Now, the problem is that we have a question of how do we know if that happened? So we say, okay, if we have witnesses, the witnesses tell us that happened, so then the crime happened. And Torah doesn't look at it like that. The Torah says that how do we know that the witnesses are part of the story if it happened or not? Means even though the witnesses haven't committed the crime, but the witnesses make the crime into a crime that's punishable by X, Y, and Z punishment. Without the witnesses, it doesn't have the punishment. So that it's not the witnesses don't reveal something. This is in Torah study, it's not a gilui. The witnesses are not just revealing something, they're also establishing that something happens. So much so that in a case where there's no consequences for them, so their testimony is weak, because we're not sure, there's no real punishment, there's no consequences if we find out that they're lying. Therefore, they're not able to establish the fact of the kidnapping, even though we have no reason to believe at this moment that they would be lying. Because theoretically, if they would be lying, they wouldn't have consequences. So that's what Rashi goes and says now. Rashi says, therefore, go ahead.
I have a small question, slightly adjacent to what this topic is. How does the Talmud, I think you mentioned this is mostly written up in Makos, but how does it handle people who are witnesses and they're like terminally ill?
We discussed this already. We discussed it, I think the Gemara, we had it not too far ago. The Gemara has talked about that if the witnesses are on their deathbed and you can't kill them, it's the same problem. As long as the witnesses as long as the witnesses can't get punished for their testimony, or they're not considered live. I forget. Thank you for reminding me of that. I forget the exact ruling, but the Gemara discussed it, and it's a problem. I mean, when I say a problem, I mean, it's not a proper testimony.
So that also extends to somebody who doesn't owe land doing like false testimony or on a financial crime against someone whose penalty would have been a very large, massive, like financial, I don't know, like a fine or a fee or something. You can't reflect that back and take this person who has no money and put them into further debt, or is that like switched into like they can work it off or something? How does that kind of thing? Is it too far away to talk about?
No. That's a good question also. But in that case, it's not. No, just if you don't have the money to pay what you're trying to accomplish, right? Let's say you're trying to get someone to pay $100 million and you have $5. So the consequences for you is you go bankrupt and nothing you can do. That's not considered. That's because then you have an obligation. You can't pay your obligation, but the Torah is able to obligate you. The Gemara has a problem when it comes into laws of a kohen grusha, right? Let's say you testify that a woman is in divorce, not divorced. There's certain things that you can't apply to them. So the Gemara says then you get malchus. That means therefore we have to kick in with the side It doesn't apply to money because the money you have an obligation. So you're right. The person may not satisfy his obligation and never be able to satisfy his obligation, but at least the obligation is there. In our case over here, there's no obligation. It's not like the Torah saying we want to kill you, but we can't. It's not a full testimony because the witnesses could say we weren't coming to kill him. We only were coming to say half a story. We only said half a story. So the question is now if their testimony is only half a story, and therefore there's no consequences to the testimony. So can we even punish when they say the testimony and they're not even lying? Let's say they're not lying, right? That's what Rashi says now. V'kivam de'inu, these witnesses, loy miklti, we can't kill them. Ihu, the kidnapper, nami im loy huzmo. Even if we don't find these witnesses to be saying a lie, loy miklti, it's the miktel, he doesn't get killed. The havala edus shi'ata yochel azimah, because the testimony is a kind of testimony that can't be refuted properly. And there's no proper punishment and consequences. Therefore, it's not a solid enough testimony. It's almost as if there's no witnesses that the person kidnapped. So what does Rashi say? Rashi teaches a crazy law. That the Gemara does not discuss this, and it's not so simple that everyone would agree to this. But Rashi says, according to the Havamina, therefore the only time a person gets killed in kidnapping, if there's one set of witnesses, one set of witnesses that say he kidnapped and stole. It's not a crazy concept to have one set of witnesses, right? But it's not like it's a difficult thing to put together. But that's the only case where the person would be considered kidnapped, that to be punished by death. Shemeidim, that they say testimony, this one set of witnesses, al hagneva vi al hamechira, on the kidnapping and on the selling. Now he says like this. Rashi continues that this Gemara is a plukted Rabbi Kiva Rabbanim Bab Bas V'Ches Zabatim. This idea of do we group together witnesses or not is an argument that Rabbi Kiva has with the rabbis in the laws of Cheskas Zabatim, which means the chazaka, whose ownership of a house. The verse says like this. Again, the Torah tells us everything about the Torah is very exact. The verse in the Torah that tells us the power of witnesses, the wording is like this: Al pi shneim edim yakum davar. On the mouth or on the testimony of two witnesses, yakum davar, something is established. And they're not saying that it reveals what happened, right? In theory, witnesses are only revealing a story. But the Torah uses a stronger language. It doesn't say it reveals a story. It says yakum. It's mekayim. It establishes a story. The establishing of the story happens with the witnesses. And therefore, they have to say a complete thing and not a half a thing. And this is only half a testimony. They're only saying either he stole or he kidnapped. But he sold this person or he kidnapped the person. Ella kol kat to kat. Each set of witnesses, if not for, let's say, the second set of witnesses had no idea about the first set of witnesses, and all these said testimonies, this person sold so and so. Because they could have said, "What do you mean? We had no idea that we're saying testimony on a kidnapping case. We thought we're just telling a story about someone who sold his servant." He could have been talking about he sold his servant, which is something that could happen. We love mechira, and if there was never witnesses that there was a sale, you never would have put him to death for the kidnapping. So because each one only says half a thing, so according to the rabbis, according to Rabbi Akiva, that's a chatzi davar, and therefore Chizkiah holds, according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, the halach that says that we don't put these witnesses to death because they're only establishing half a story, and therefore Rashi himself adds to that their testimony is not a strong enough testimony, even if they're not found out to be lying, to put the kidnapper to death. So now I'm going to say the next Rashi as well. Here Chizkiah agrees that when do two sets of witnesses work separately and we don't team them up, is in the case of the rebellious son. The Tanan Liel we learned before on page 71a. That Masrim by first we warned the child before a court of three, that he did what he did. Umalkin say we give him wet lashes for being a disobedient child, and that's that. So hopefully that's enough. The child got lashes and is back on the what do they call it? Back on the line of the straight and narrow. Chazar v'kilka. What happens if he continues in his rebellious ways? Then Nidam B'Eshem Shlesha, we bring him to a court of 23 because now becomes a question of a death penalty, so you need a higher level of court. Masrim by Avi Vimoy b'fnei hadayanim. So he says, what happens? The first thing is he gets warned in front of the judges. In the first case, the first witnesses who said that he continued to he's a person who's rebelling, he's eating, stealing, whatever. That he ate tarmati basar, he ate this amount of meat that we learned about. He drank the wine that we learned about. And he stole the money to buy the wine and to buy the meat, and he did all that. So Malkanais, he gets lashes, like it says that he gets warned. The Hainu Malkus, which means he gets lashes. However, that's the first set of witnesses. Then let's say he continues to act this way. He gets judged by a court of 23. Lemisa. And in this case, let's say a second set of witnesses come and say that the kid continues to go on this path. And they found that they were lying. That these witnesses were lying. So then then it's not a half a testimony. Because that we would say that if not for the first set of witnesses, then we don't kill the second set of witnesses. We say because he would get lashes for the first testimony. That he gets lashes. Okay, so therefore they say each one is doing their own thing because the first set of witnesses gives him lashes, the second set of witnesses gives him the death penalty, and therefore they're separate sets of witnesses. So the reason we have to understand this is because the Gemara is going to build on this. So in the case of the rebellious son, even though there's two steps, each step is its own punishment. Each step has its own witnesses. They're not related. Once we've already established that he's a rebellious son, that's already been established. The second set of witnesses are lying on their own, and they're trying to bring a death penalty. And if they're caught to be lying, they get put to death. Okay, so that's where we're holding so far. We're again back to page 86, 86.2. Now comes Rav Papa and he asks the question. Maskav Rav Papa. Now Rav Papa asks the question. This is where it gets a bit complicated. If that's the case, if you want to say that Chizkiah agrees that in the case of the rebellious son, where he receives lashes for the first warning, and comes a second set of witnesses and tries to build on that to say testimony that he should be put to death, and they're found to be lying, it's a complete testimony on the second stage, and therefore he gets put to death. So therefore, in our case, why are we not killing that means the witnesses that came and said that he sold X, Y, and Z, they're not selling that, they're not coming to say a testimony that so-and-so just sold someone. They're saying a testimony that this set of witnesses that said he kidnapped him, we're telling you that he kidnapped him, that he also sold him. So they're literally taking the story a step further. So Rav Papa says, if that's the case, and you're saying that the first set of witnesses established a kidnapping, like a first set of witnesses established rebellious son. And what decides if we separate the two sets of witnesses and don't make it a half a testimony is if there's a punishment on whatever the first set of witnesses say. Here also, if you kidnap someone and you don't sell him, there's also punishment of malchus, of lashing. We're going to see in a second how we know that. But the Torah doesn't tell us. The Torah says don't kidnap a person. Right, that's what we learned. Last week. Last time we learned that the verse in the Ten Commandments that says "Do not steal" is talking about kidnapping and it's punishable by death. But we say that the condition to be put to death, you have to kidnap and sell. What happens if you just kidnap? Does the Torah just say a person gets away scot-free for kidnapping someone? No. So the theory is the person gets lashes for kidnapping someone. So that's the first. So if I said testimony that someone kidnapped someone. One set of witnesses say testimony that someone kidnapped someone. That's a full testimony. That's a punishment. Built on that, you want to say, then he sold him. So now it's a new testimony. If it's a new testimony, just like the case of the rebellious son, the second set of witnesses should be put to death. So why don't we kill the second set of witnesses that say that he sold the kidnapped person? Because the first set of witnesses could say, we're nothing to do with the second set of witnesses. Our testimony was to give the person lashes, and he would get lashes just in our testimony. Doesn't need a second testimony to get lashes. The question is that we can only use this argument to break up the two sets of testimony if we hold the law is that you get lashes for kidnapping someone. But maybe you don't get lashes. It means maybe what we're trying to analyze over here is what we've already established with the rebellious son is that even though the crime continues, right? The rebellious son continues in his bad ways. He's continuing, so to say, in his crime. But if there's punishments for different stages, then we break it up. Because one set of testimony comes and says that the person did so and so, and therefore gets one punishment. And if there's an additional punishment built on the first testimony, if it gets divided by punishing, so the witnesses say we don't know each other. You want to make us a team? I'm not a team. I don't know who the next guy is. You want to say, what did I want to accomplish with my false testimony? I thought he's going to get lashes. I never had intention to put the person to death. And he would get lashes based on my testimony if we found that to be saying the truth. And by the way, FYI, in the case of the rebellious son, it's possible that the first set of witnesses are telling the truth. They don't have to be lying. Just like the case of the kidnapping. A person could kidnap and not sell. A lot of times you have, by the way, when is there a space for false testimony, specifically when there's a beginning of a crime? So people want to maximize and magnify the crime, right? So the second set of witnesses may lie to give a greater, let's say, for instance, someone committed a crime and kidnapped someone. Everyone's angry, right? They kidnap, but you want the person to really get punished for the kidnapping. And the Torah is only going to give the person the death penalty if he sells it, right? So then you could say that the person, the second set of witnesses are lying, so we should give them maximum punishment. But there is this, how to start with the first part of the crime. The first part of the crime has to be the kidnapping. But to make up a whole story that the person never kidnapped and then he sold him, that's kind of more far-fetched. So there's actually a logic to think why the second set of witnesses would only come after the first set of witnesses that could even be telling the truth. So, but let's say they're both saying that, they're both lying. In our case, they're both lying. But the first set of witnesses could say, my intention was just to give the person lashes, which is punishable for kidnapping. So therefore, I have nothing to do with the second. So we're not saying a half a thing. Each one is saying a whole thing. Once I already established that he kidnapped and he gets lashes, the second set of witnesses are trying to do another separate thing, which is punishable by death for selling after you kidnap. So therefore, Papa says, so why don't we kill the second set of witnesses? Because they have it's not a half a testimony, just like it's not a half a testimony by the rebellious son. So the first set of witnesses could say, we only came to give the person lashes. So we want to ask, maybe a person is going to say, there's no such thing. There's no punishment for just kidnapping. There's no malchus. But it's not true, because we learned about this. That says, let's say we only have testimony of witnesses that say someone kidnapped someone, that were found out to be lying. So what do we do in such a case? Right? We only have a half a story, there's definitely not a death penalty in such a case. Chizkiya Rabbi Yechon is again an argument. Chad Amar one says that they get lashes. Chad Amar ain't the one says they don't get lashes. And we said in the yeshiva, when we said who said what, not every time you have to remember something. This is written many years after a story. Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan lived many years ago, many years before the publication of the Talmud. So we don't know who said what. We just know that there was an argument about such and such subject. But we have enough reason to assume who said what based on previous arguments that we know what they said. So Amrinan, we said, this time it makes sense. The Chizkiya is the opinion that says, can you get malchus? Why? The very fact that Chizkiya says that they wouldn't get killed. So here's where it gets a little complicated. The very fact that Chizkiya says that a half a testimony, that if you have a testimony where they say there's witnesses that kidnap and there's witnesses that sell, and they find that to be lying, they don't get killed. So we separate the testimony. There's a problem like this. The question over here is, what's the lav? There's a lot of different prohibitions over here. Again, there's the prohibition that the Ten Commandments says is loy sana v'recha et shakar. Do not be a false witness. That's what it says in the Ten Commandments. We don't know the punishment for that. And the Gemara Makkas discusses that verse, in the Ten Commandments. And it says only, it depends what the scenario is, but just false testimony itself, if there's no action to it, then there's no lashes. When it means it comes in the Gemara says, for instance, let's say witnesses say testimony that someone did this violation, and that violation is punishable by lashes. So does he get 2 sets of lashes or 1 set of lashes? Why would you get 2 sets of lashes? One is for trying to give lashes, and the second one is for false testimony, for violating the prohibition. Says don't say false testimony. They're 2 different sets. That's Rameir's opinion. The Chacham say no, it's only 1 set of lashes, because the loisan of everyone agrees that that's not punishable by lashes. That's just because there's no you didn't unless the testimony brings to something. The testimony itself, there's no action. You just said something. So here we said over here we have an argument. One opinion says that someone kidnapped. The other opinion says both there was a kidnapping and there was a false testimony on the kidnapping, or there was a questionable kidnapping and found out to be false testimony. There's 2 opinions. One opinion says they get lashes. The one other opinion says they don't get lashes. Who says what? The Gemara says it would make sense. The Chizkiah says you get lashes. Why? Because they did a prohibition of lying. They said false testimony. The testimony on its own would never give them the death penalty because they didn't say a full testimony. So therefore, there was never a concern that their testimony would lead to death penalty. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Even if they said, because Rabbi Yochanan is the opinion who says that if a second set of witnesses come and say that not only did he kidnap, he also sold the person that he kidnapped. And Rabbi Yochanan says the law is in such a case, we team together the 2 sets of witnesses and we put all 4 of them to death. So therefore, it becomes a lav shenitin l'misas bezin. It's a prohibition that can be connected to the death penalty. And the rule is that a law that has a connection to the death penalty, you don't get lashes for. It means if it could be upgraded to a capital punishment, the rabbis would not give you lashes, even though seemingly if it doesn't get upgraded, there's a benefit for the witnesses because they don't get lashes. Whereas according to Chizkiah, they get punished for what they've done wrong. But nevertheless, that's the rule. The rule is if this testimony, if this prohibition could lead to being from a prohibition to a capital punishment, it cannot include in it lashes. That's the rule of Torah. So therefore we assume, the Gemara says, Mistabra, we have to assume that Chizkiah is the one who says that this time the Chizkiah because their testimony would never lead to the death penalty. So they violated the prohibition of saying false testimony. Because they could get killed if they were the second set of witnesses to say that he sold the person. It's a prohibition that's connected to a warning that could lead to a punishable by death by the Bezdin. You don't get Malchus. So the Gemara so clearly that we know that they would get punished. Why? They would get punished for seemingly violating the verse that says, don't say false testimony. And because that on its own would never lead to death penalty according to Chizkiah, therefore he says you get Malchus. The question is like this. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. So the Gemara says now that if he wouldn't get lashes, means hypothetically, if you just take all the verses and put them together, there could be a scenario that the kidnapper doesn't get punished by lashing. Let's say you just kidnap someone and you don't sell them. The Torah never tells us what happens to such a person. The Torah, he says you can't kidnap. It doesn't. We don't know if that's if that's because it's only a half a crime. You haven't sold him. Maybe there's no actual punishment for kidnapping. The Torah says don't kidnap. We learned before in the Gemara there's 2 verses, but maybe it's not punishable by lashing. We don't know for sure it's punishable by lashing, but we do know that there's someone who holds, and we assume it's Chizkiah, that witnesses that only talk about kidnapping, they get lashes. So the question, and if they're lying. So he says, if the kidnapper wouldn't get lashes, how could we give lashes to the false witnesses? Now, seemingly you could say, what do you mean? There are 2 different violations. One is for false testimony, and one is for kidnapping. Kidnapping doesn't have lashes. False testimony does have lashes. But there's no punishment. The problem is that there's no really clearly that the Torah says that false testimony itself carries lashes. It has to be connected to a punishment. So if what their testimony wouldn't have accomplished anything, right? So I lied and said he kidnapped, but he doesn't get punished for it. Why you give? It's a lav shein b'maisa. There's nothing happened here. I said that this guy kidnapped, but he doesn't get punished for it. So why are you punishing me? So therefore, it has to be kasher zamim lasis la'achid, what he wanted to do to the person. So therefore, we have to assume that what he wanted to do is give the person lashes. So therefore, what do we see? That a person who kidnaps get lashes. If a person who kidnaps get lashes, and they said false testimony, that means they wanted to accomplish to give lashes to this person. Based on this, so we separate the testimony of kidnapping with the testimony of selling, and therefore the second test is according to Chizkiah, the second set of witnesses be killed, just like the second set of witnesses get killed in the case of the rebellious son. So Rapapa, so therefore the Gemara says, Rapapa concludes based on this, and therefore based on this he says that everyone agrees, Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, that false witnesses that are found to be lying in a case of kidnapping, the second set of witnesses, the ones that say that he kidnapped, that he sold the kidnapped person, everyone agrees he gets killed, like the case of the rebellious son, because we separate the testimony. But what's the argument? The first set of witnesses, the witnesses that testify that he kidnapped. Chizkiah Amar Ein Hargin, he doesn't get killed. Why? Because it's separate. We're separating the testimony of the kidnapping from the selling, and therefore there's no connection. It's a chatzi davar, like the Rabbi Akiva says, and therefore he gets lashes, but he doesn't get killed. And Gneiv l'chud kaima or mechir l'chud kaima, we separate kidnapping from selling the kidnapped person, the alleged kidnapped person, because it's false testimony, never happened. Rabbi Yochanan says nehargin. Because the beginning of selling a person is kidnapping a person, and in this case, Rabbi Yochanan agrees. But they both agree that Rabbi Yochanan also agrees that because they would be giving lashes to the rebellious son in the first testimony, that set of witnesses does not get killed because they could claim that we never had an intention to put this person to death. We only wanted to give him lashes. We never knew that there would be another set of witnesses that would come and say that he continued on his bad path. I thought we would go to the Mishnah. I guess we'll have to stop here. I know, guys. It's a difficult Gemara, and we didn't do even all the Rashis, which are difficult. What sat on me a little when I prepared this class yesterday earlier today, is the various verses that we have over here. But just to make to summarize it all and to walk away with a complete situation here, is that we have a violation that says in the Ten Commandments about false testimony. In false testimony, we have don't lie. The question is if that's not really discussed in our Gemara, but it's discussed in Makis, if that has what punishment is for false testimony. We also have a situation of kidnapping. We also have a situation that kidnapping requires kidnapping and selling. And in our Gemara that we discussed today, we have two sets of witnesses that say half a story. One says kidnapping and one says selling. So in here, to put it all together, we have the fundamental thinking is that there's two questions here. One question is, even let's say can we combine testimony in general? Can we ever combine testimony? If two sets of witnesses tell us a full story, is that a full story? So the rabbis say yes, and Rabbi Akiva says no. Based on the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva, and this applies to not just death or kidnapping, this applies to ownership, property. Can witnesses team up together? Even though one says, I don't know what happened in 2020. I can tell you what happened in 2021, that this person lived here. And the third set of witnesses come back and say, I don't know what happened in 221 and 222. I can tell you what happened in 223, right? So even though that the witnesses themselves are saying a half a story, but if you put the story together, we have the complete conclusion that this person lived in this property for 3 years. So in that, just like we have in that argument in Cheskes Abat, we have over here also. One set of witnesses say, I know this person sold so-and-so. The other one says, I know before that he kidnapped so-and-so. He wasn't his servant, he kidnapped him. Forget if they're lying. They're just saying a half a testimony. So in this case, as Rashi says right away, first of all, because the testimony itself is weak according to Chizkiah, the kidnapper doesn't even get punished based on such a testimony. But before we get to Chizkiah, the rabbis say, no, we put it together. The Rabbi Yochanan says we group it together. We know a complete story that happened over here. So-and-so kidnapped and sold so-and-so. And therefore, if all four of them are found to be lying, they all get put to death. Because once they said a full story, they become a unit of witnesses that tell us a complete story. Their story is a story that would cause someone to be killed. Therefore, they get put to death. Chizkiah says no. They're only saying a half a story. Now, the question is, why is Reb Chizkiah saying half a story? If we disconnect them because they are each one is trying to accomplish something and punishing. The first set of witnesses could say, I don't know the second set of witnesses. I was just trying to give the person lashes. I never had intention to kill this person. Meaning to say is, if the first set of witnesses wouldn't cause anything to the alleged kidnapper, so you say, why would you have said that he kidnapped him if the only punishment you could have accomplished is death? And the very fact that you said half a testimony means to say that you wanted to put this person to death. You're relying on the second set of witnesses to come and fill in your space. But that would only apply if they could say that. Shuki, you trying to ask something? I have your hand up. Mistake.
Yeah, a small question.
Sure.
Is this basically just an argument about whether or not there's a need to determine whether or not the Eidim are colluding together?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a question is, can the Eidim, even though we could assume a strong probability that they were teaming together, but
Right.
if the first set of witnesses could in any way say, I was trying to accomplish, I could have accomplished something on my own, a lesser punishment of lashes, not the death penalty. So why would you put me together with this guy? So then Chizkiah says, okay, that's right. So they're not connected to the death penalty. But Rav Papa says, but the second set of witnesses cannot disconnect from the first set of witnesses because they built on them. So therefore, they should get the death penalty just like the rebellious son. But if you,
I guess what I'm asking is more on the side of the investigation into deciding that information, right? Like, what are you weighing? Like, who's making the decision? Is there a court decision? Does it like delay the trial and they have to now figure out what to do with these two Adim and figure out if they're colluding? Or is it just like it's all based on testimony that you determine that they're Adim, right? It's always like someone comes forward saying this, and so you have new testimony, so it's part of the same case then. And so I'm just trying to figure out, like, does the court then continue on for a while trying to determine collusion before continuing, or do they just like take care of that later?
that's an excellent question. But what seems like with the Gemara is that the focus is as soon as we have false witnesses, we never go to investigate their intent. It goes into motion the automatic claims they could say. It means even if unless they clearly
So
say
it's
that
an assumption of collusion,
it's not just assumption. The Torah tells us this is what happens.
right?
See what happens over here. This is like, again, that's what I'm saying. In Jewish law, but the Torah establishes the facts in certain situations. The Torah is establishing a fact that as long as the witnesses can claim that we're not connected, we had a private agenda, i.e., give the person lashes. So we don't need them to claim that. It means because they can claim that, so therefore their testimony never gets united in the first place. It means as long as the Torah says there's something to be said about their false testimony on their own, or their testimony on their own, so we never combine the testimonies. It never becomes a unit of four witnesses. And therefore, it means unless you're asking a question, what would happen if the four witnesses came and said, we're telling you with loud voices that we sat together and had a plan, and our plan was to kill this person. Now, I'm going to say half, and he's going to say half. And what would happen in such a case? Would the Torah just say, well, sorry, technicality, we can't put you guys together? I don't know. That's a good question. If they clearly said that we had a plan to put this person to death. But it seems like the Gemara it's all kicks in, especially Rashi. Rashi says that Rashi goes even before this. Rashi says even if they're never proved to be false witnesses, Not just because we never have proof that they're false witnesses. They're not false witnesses. They're not false witnesses. There's two set of witnesses, one who saw the kidnapping, the other one who saw the selling. But in theory, if they were to be caught as false witnesses, we couldn't judge them based on Chizkiah saying that they could separate themselves. And they could say it's only a half a testimony, or I only wanted to give lashes, whatever, according to Rapapa, according to the initial thinking of the Gemara. The Rashi says that we learned before. The Rashi says we never put the kidnapper to death. The kidnapper gets off on the lack of proper testimony, and proper testimony would be, according to Rabbi Akiva, a full thing, not a half a thing. And because we don't combine them, it's not the law. The law is obviously according to the rabbis, according to Rabbi Yochanan. But the thinking of Rabbi Akiva is that there's no testimony, there's no testimony that could be refuted, and therefore there's no testimony, and therefore there's no death penalty in the first place. That's what that means. And that's where the Gemara doesn't even have to get into the arguments. When the Gemara says, when the judges are sitting there, and two sets of witnesses walk in, according to Chizkiah, there's never going to be a case of capital punishment in this scenario. Because the witnesses can never have proper consequences. And if they can never have proper consequences, their testimony is not establishing enough, it's not strong enough to establish fact. Basically, what the Torah says is that in order for there to be a capital punishment, there has to be able to be that there's consequence to testimony. As long as there's no consequences to their testimony, so their testimony isn't strong enough, even though there's no reason to believe they're lying. And based on that, the punishment is not going to be the punishment they're trying to accomplish, or that, and even if it's true, there was a kidnapping, there was a selling, but the testimony is not strong enough because their ability to be refuted isn't strong. Again, I know this is a complicated Gemara. The reason why it's so complicated because it's not really our. If we were learning this in Makkas, we would probably understand it a bit better. It's not really part of our sugya. And we only have half. We only went through half of it. The other half, hopefully, we'll finish next week. And again, that's part of the beauty of learning Talmud, is that you never know what the Talmud is going to teach us today. Laila Tov, everyone. Take care. Shavua Tov.
Laila Tov. Thank you.